Test 1 2 3.
It's 9 a.m. and I'll call this meeting to order. We'll begin. Pledge of Allegiance. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Keith.
Sure.
Thanks.
Hand over your heart.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, Linda, do you want to begin with announcements?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting and in person, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Knox?
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. David Green?
Buenos dias.
Gracias. Mr. Santos?
Bonjour.
No, it's.
Mr. Jason Green?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Rue?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Mrs. Jones?
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Mr. Kelly? Good morning. And Chair Sanchez?
Jó reggelt. I went with my Hungarian version.
Staff participating in the meeting include the following: CIO John Grable, Chief Counsel Stephen Rice, DCEO Louis Lugo, AEOs JJ Popovich and Laura Guglielmo, Interim CFO Ted Granger, Legislative Affairs Officer Barry Liu. Investment staff include Scott Drazel, Dale Johnson, Jude Perez, James Rice, Christopher Wagner, Cindy Rivera, Krista Powell, Calvin Chang, Cheryl Liu, and Derek Khan. Consultants on site are the Makita Group and the Stepstone Group. Trustees, please use your raise your hand option to be placed in the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mic until you're ready to speak. And now we may proceed with the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rice, do we have any requests for teleconference?
We do not.
Hello, everybody. This is the first time we've had everyone on the board.
Mr. Ruse,
Mr. Oh, no. Okay, well, almost. All right, moving on to the approval of the minutes. I believe we have a request for correction.
yes.
Madam Chair, yes, there was an item at the last meeting where I recused myself, and that recusal and the reasons for it should be noted in the minutes. So I would just ask that they be corrected and come back to us.
Okay, so with that correction,
Move it.
thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Let's have a roll call.
Okay. Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. David Green,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Mr. Jason Green,
Aye.
Mr. Rue.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mrs. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
and Chair Sanchez.
Yo.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, I'm going all Hungarian this morning. Sorry. Moving on. So do we have any requests for public comment?
We do not.
All right, let's go on to the executive update. Okay, Mr. Grable.
Good morning, Madam Chair and trustees. It's July, so happy new fiscal year to everyone. May it be a prosperous fiscal year for LACERA and all our members. A thank you to Jim Rice for driving slides today. Thanks, Jim. And Jim, if we could begin on slide 4, that would be terrific. So slide 4 shows the results for major asset categories through June 30th, our last fiscal year. And these results are very different results than what we anticipated. And they are also very different results from the near past being fiscal year 22. In fiscal year 22, the fund was up marginally, which was a heroic effort on the part of everyone in this room. In comparison, a 60-40 portfolio of stocks to bonds, also known as a reference portfolio, was down 14% in fiscal year 22. Fiscal year 23, which are the results shown on this slide, the fund, and this is not breaking news. This is kind of an indicator because we haven't closed the books yet. We're in the midst of final reconciliation. We're probably in the mid 6-ish range for the fund as a whole. A 60-40 or that same reference portfolio, because of a very strong June in particular, you can see the 1 month return for global all cap equity was up close to 6%. So that 60-40 portfolio was up over 9% for the fiscal year. So the results of fiscal year 22 compared to fiscal year 23 for major asset categories really highlights why diversification matters. And when in doubt, go back to our investment beliefs. And that is a key investment belief. It's very important to highlight, given that at today's meeting, we'll begin the discussion about our strategic asset allocation exercise, which will occupy much of the next year. And so diversification matters twofold, at least twofold. In this case, the return gap between the time periods that were referenced, fiscal year 22 versus fiscal year 23 for major asset categories, but also the variation between asset categories. And this can be seen on the bottom table in the right-hand column where it has the 10-year annualized numbers. And if you look at that column, the spread, the range is for asset categories from a -1% per year for commodity price index to positive 13% annualized, about 13%. And to kind of emphasize what that difference means is the cumulative difference between those numbers, those endpoints, the -1 to the positive 13% is about 270%.
Wow.
Over 10 years if you annualize those numbers, or you take the cumulative effect of it. So absent diversification, if LACERA or an investor was concentrated in the wrong asset category, in this case, I'm defining the wrong asset category, which is the one that was down 1% on an annual basis, that could cost a plan like LACERA over $10 billion, depending upon the measurement date. But it's tens of billions of dollars is the potential cost to that. To pick the asset category that was up 13% to kind of bookend the discussion, we would have to develop a methodology to consistently pick winning lottery tickets. And that we can't do. We shouldn't do that. Our mission is to pay retirement benefits today, tomorrow, well into the future. We need to avoid guessing. We need to take a measured and repeatable approach, which we do. I know this was brought up last week at the Board of Retirement meeting. I believe it's Mr. Santos who brought up the point that benefit payments are dependent upon investment returns. And that once again reinforces our investment belief, why a diversified portfolio is the only strategy for us. It's not about picking lottery tickets, because in picking lottery tickets, you may not pick the asset category that returned 13%. You may pick the one that lost 1% on an annual basis. And that has a tremendously poor outcome for LACERA and our members. And once again, I will highlight that we have a prudent and deliberative process. Evidence of that is the process that we're going to begin later this morning discussing the strategic asset allocation. We can turn to slide 9.
Mr. Grable, if I may, through the chair.
Yes.
A quick question. Is commodities playing the role that it was designed to play? I know it's supposed to be negatively correlated to stocks, bonds. Are you satisfied with the role that commodities playing in terms of thinking, and what role should they play in terms of the asset allocation?
And obviously, we never know, Madam Chair and trustees, what the outcome of any asset category is going to be. Commodities proved highly valuable to the fund in the prior fiscal year. Our commodities and natural resources portfolio was our best performing asset category in the prior year. So once again, those numbers may mask intra-period movements. Commodities do diversify, but I think that the better question or better answer to the question is that that's something that we can analyze as part of our strategic asset allocation exercise as we look at capital market assumptions, which I know is agendized for the offsite, and we can look at the role prospectively of all different asset categories, not just returns, but correlations with other asset categories. So maybe I will punt the answer to having maybe a more scientific approach with the help of Makita during the strategic asset allocation exercise.
Right. So reading your answer, I think your answer is it has played the role that it was designed to play when was first introduced, whatever, 15 years ago, or whatever it was.
Yes.
So that's really what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
As slide 9 shows, this is the total fund summary as of the end of May. So we're going back a month from the end of the fiscal year to the penultimate month. May was a tough month. The fund was down 70 basis points. AUM was $72 billion, and cash in the bottom middle finished just over 800 million, which is a comfortable target where we like to keep around 3 months of net benefit payments on hand at all times. And we spent a lot of time just to comfort the board, looking at cash forecasts and projecting 90 days prospectively, just to make sure that we're always at a comfortable level, and schedule monthly rebalance calls just to make sure that we, based upon that rolling forecast, that we'll finish or will be throughout the month, have sufficient cash on hand. The asset allocation is on target and can be seen on the right-hand side. All the different functional asset categories really are right on target. And I'll reemphasize, at this meeting, we'll begin the process for the strategic asset allocation. There'll be a report from Deputy CIO Perez later this morning on that. And maybe, in some sense, that's bearing the headline that the reports from Deputy CIO Perez. But I know I sent out a note to the board after the last meeting that Jude was named the Deputy CIO. So congratulations, Jude. And we'll have some other HR announcements later on in good of the order. Next slide. This is the performance for the fund and OPEB. Once again, as of the end of May, the fund is nicely ahead of policy benchmarks for most periods. And that's also part of our strategic asset allocation is a benchmark review, because I always want to be ahead of benchmarks, but benchmarks are meant to challenge. They're not meant to be participation trophies. And to the extent where there are some benchmarks we're not ahead of, that probably shows that the benchmarks are appropriate, as opposed to just, being used for marketing purposes or kind of a participation trophy. Maybe the most important benchmark that we're ahead of over long time periods is the actuarial benchmark at 7%. We are, if you go look at the 10-year number, we're smartly ahead of that. OPEB at the bottom of the page has a market value of about $2.9 billion. I was down 1.4% for the month. Fiscal year to date, OPEB is up 5.2%. And to compare the two plans, OPEB's returns are stronger when public equity markets rally, specifically because there's much higher exposure to public equities in OPEB compared to the pension. The pension tends to do better in down and more mixed markets. There's greater diversification in multiple dimensions, be it public, private, and variety of asset categories. These return comparisons will converge over time as OPEB has begun to implement the private allocation. If we can turn to slide 12. This slide and the next one are updated slides. This is a view of various risk data for the fund as a whole and the functional categories. I believe that this view, same information as what we had last month and the months before. This hopefully is more visual and more digestible. And thanks to the portfolio analytics team and everyone on staff for constantly reinventing the CIO report. So thank you. This slide details total fund risk, defined for this purpose as volatility, which is one of the dimensions of risks that we define or we articulate in our investment beliefs. This slide pulls position level data to the extent that we have it. We don't have it for all private markets, but we have it for much of the portfolio. And it pulls that data through our comprehensive risk system. And it shows, once again, the benefits of total fund diversification. And when I say that, I know that I sound like a broken record. Total fund diversification is the best strategy. Maybe part of that statement I also need to revisit, because I was told recently that by saying broken record, that's somewhat of a dated statement. It's not a modern statement. So I Googled modern equivalent of broken record, and I am retweeting myself.
Reading yourself.
So
That's fantastic.
yes. So I will retweet myself, and actually retweet oneself is a hard thing to say fast, like 5 or 10 times. So I will retweet myself and talk about the benefits of total fund diversification as evident in the slide. And that can be really seen in the bottom middle, the chart in the bottom middle that details forecast risk. And the left column shows capital weights. The right one shows risk weights. And whereas growth, the dark blue, which is, think of that as equity, is about 50% of our capital weight. The chart on the right shows it's closer to 80% of our forecast risk. Once again, the dark blue in the bottom middle, that the risk weight is higher in the case of growth than our capital allocation. Now, in contrast to that, if we look at our capital allocation to risk mitigation, which is about 19%, in capital allocation, on the right-hand side, it's less than 2% of fund forecast risk. So it really shows the benefit of risk mitigation. And this goes back to Mr. Santos's question about, even though commodities isn't in risk mitigation, it just shows the benefit of how different asset categories play off one another to really have 1 + 1 = 3. So maybe once again, I will retweet my prior statement that I made from slide 4, which is the importance of total fund diversification. And this is really important for a mature pension that I know we discussed last month, given that we're cash flow negative. And then we discussed that most months. But hopefully this really helps pave the groundwork for a productive strategic asset allocation exercise. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll pause for questions.
Okay, do we have questions?
Just one comment.
Yep.
I thought it's the modern way of saying broken record is I'm retreating myself, like threat, the latest one that came out with Google. So that's actually the most modern one.
Mhm.
Nothing else.
I love it. Okay, this way. So it is. I find it very interesting. First of all, I want to just compliment your constant design skills in that show themselves, because it does make the information more digestible. So thank you for that. So whoever came up with this design layout, gold star, or the modern day equivalent, 5 stars. So moving on. Great. So we'll go on to our member spotlight.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning, everybody.
Yeah.
So this is the time of the meeting when we recognize a county employee who is retiring or has been with the county for a significant amount of time, to remind us what we're here for and the members that we serve. And so if we'll go to the next slide. This month, we're recognizing Andre Shelton. who has been a road maintenance, well, he's currently a road maintenance superintendent with Public Works. He's been with the county for 37 years. And Mr. Shelton estimates that he's been responsible in some way for improvement of over 300 miles of sidewalks, curbs, roads, and gutters across Los Angeles County. And so as a citizen of Los Angeles County, I certainly appreciate that and his efforts and his team's efforts. So he is thinking about retiring soon. He's a volunteer preacher, so he's going to do some of that. And he also loves camping, so he's going to enjoy time camping with his family. But we really do recognize Andre Shelton for all of his service to the county. And this is exactly the type of individual that we're all here to take care of as he enters his retirement years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Okay, Mr. Lugo, the Chief Executive Officer's report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Good morning, trustees. Before I get started, certainly want to send well wishes to Mr. Kryman. He was en route, but had car issues, so he had to go take care of his vehicle. So I'm stepping in. So a few items to update the board on is, first and foremost, we got the Board of Retirement Strategic Plan approved last week. We certainly appreciate the board leadership for the BOI as well as the BOR and our fiduciary council to get us to that point. So we're excited about the 5-year roadmap. It's certainly a ripple down effect with our investment staff as we look at not only maturing our services around member service delivery, but obviously leveraging technology and also our talent management. So collectively, we certainly appreciate the efforts of all staff. Investment staff was also part of that Board of Retirement Strategic Plan. And we will be bringing that to the Board of Investments as an FYI next month. So you'll be able to read through. We did send out an email to all staff with the attachment, as well as posting it publicly in the next month or so. I think that's in the works with our communications department. The other half of the strategic plan is the mission, vision, values. So that will be going to the JOGC in August for discussion with both boards. So we hope to get that finalized in terms of that last piece of our organizational values and vision and mission to be posted publicly as well. So we look forward to that discussion next month. As it relates to recruitment, we're continuing to progress on our recruitment efforts. The SIO, as well as the FA3 for corporate governance and the SIO for real estate, we're engaging with EFL. There's meetings that will be scheduled to start those recruitments, and look forward to soliciting candidates. We also have the FA3 for real estate that we're going to relaunch. HR is working through that process, as well as a PIO for portfolio analytics as a result of DCIO's Mr. Perez's promotion. So looking at that classification to post as well. So a lot of efforts are going into the priorities among investments. Also within information security, we talked about this last month. I think Mr. Kryman mentioned some of the transition within the information security department. We have interviewed LACERA information security candidates last week, I think, or the last couple of weeks, and we're going to be doing second round interviews the later part of this month, I think July 24th. So we look forward to hopefully onboarding a LACERA information security officer in the coming month or so. That's a tongue twister, Mr. Grable. Also, the CEO dashboard, there's been some highlights. I won't go into details. The memo, the CEO report updates some of the updates to the member service section, the retiree healthcare section, as well as the financial section. And Trustee Santos, I know some of the comments you made last month in terms of highlighting some of the financial information on a CEO report dashboard, that's been included as well. So it highlights specifically the fact that 69% of every dollar, 69 cents of every dollar represents investment returns. So that's certainly something that we want to continue to communicate and highlight to our membership. General election for both general members and retired members. There's a timeline that's posted, a couple of dates to be aware of. July 17th, the election notices are emailed to our vendor. Voting begins August 4th. It concludes August 31st. The Board of Supervisors CEO office will then have preliminary results by September 12th. And then October, I got it in front of me, 17th is when we will declare the election results official. So I will continue to update the board on our progress there. And with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my updates. Open for any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments?
Yes, I got a comment.
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Santos.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, looking at the key financial matrix in their report, want to thank you. And I'm going to repeat what I said at the Board of Retirement last week. You know, since I've been elected to this board for the past 19 years or so, I have seen how many times we've been attacked. We meaning LACERA, because the part of the attacks that we have faced is that people believe, the taxpayers or the public believe that somehow or another we, the public employees, be ripping off the taxpayer because we are lazy, quote unquote, lazy employees. And they don't realize that we are the people who have to go under the sewer to fix the sewer, work in the emergency room with people that suffer major accidents and things like that. So this matrix here is really key, because if you look at 79% or 79 cents of every dollar that we pay to Mr. Kelly, as an example, doesn't count for the taxpayer. Again, it does not count for the taxpayer. 79 cents of every dollar that we pay out, or 79%. It's very important that we remember that. And also appreciates the board, the role that we all play here, both staff of the board and obviously Mr. Grable, of the tremendous work that has been done over the years and continues to we continue to do. So it's very important. Also, I want to thank Mr. Grable for always keeping in mind the liquidity factor that we need in this organization, because I think I said it before, in 2008, we were very close to not being able to meet our obligation because of we didn't have enough liquid assets. So since then, I'm very happy to see that Mr. Grable is always very good on making sure that we always have sufficient liquid funds so we can meet our obligations. Very important. So thank you again, and hopefully the next time I see that, it's going to be at least 70 cents coming from this
No pressure.
investments. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you, Louis. I had two comments. The first is that in this report, it references some samples. There's a calculation made and it says based on samples selected. Just for next month, can you provide in the narrative part of the report an explanation of who pulls those samples and how they're pulled? I just want to make sure that they're clean samples, if you will, that they're not, if they're pulled judgmentally, there's a logic behind them. Is that logic documented, et cetera? Because, and then why in 2023 are you pulling any samples and not just calculating based off of the entire population with all the data we have? So that's one thing. The second thing is, I asked last month about the status of, I didn't ask, I complained last month about the status of acting positions. Also for next month's report, can you include just a broad overview of how many people are in acting positions in the department and where they fall out in terms of priority? Because my complaint was the priority changes every month, and I didn't think that was a cool thing to do. Just those two things. Thank you again.
Thank you, Trustee Kelly. We'll take that.
Okay, and we'll note that as action items. Okay, any further comments or questions? All right, moving on to consent items. We have 3 items for consent. Thank you. Second, roll call.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mrs. Jones.
Aye.
Mr. Kelly. And Chair Sanchez.
Yep.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, good luck, Mr. Grable, in your election. Moving on to reports. So we have 2 really important reports this morning. Do we have any requests to pull any other information items? Okay, with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Grable and newly appointed Deputy CIO Jude Pettis to discuss strategic asset allocation process review.
All right. Good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. The next item on the agenda, as you mentioned, is a strategic asset allocation process overview. I'll wait a second while Jim pulls up the slides. But while he's doing that, the goal for today's presentation is to give a high-level view of the process we plan on taking over the next several months as we go through our next strategic asset allocation exercise for both the defined benefit plan as well as the OPEB trust. So the process will look very familiar for the trustees who went through this exercise last time, but for the benefit of our new trustees, I do want to mention that our investment policy statement states that a comprehensive asset allocation study will be conducted every 3 to 5 years or at the board's request. And also, the expectation of this study is not to make wholesale changes to our existing asset allocation. It's more to make smaller refinements to help us improve and make sure that we have an appropriate plan so that we can meet our mission going forward in the future. So, Jim, if you don't mind moving to slide 3. So turning to slide 3, we'll cover some background. On this slide, we'll see LACERA's mission statement, and everything we do should be with the goal of meeting that mission of to produce, protect, and provide the promised benefit. So how do we do that? How do we fulfill our mission? So from an investment standpoint, we fulfill our mission by constructing a prudent investment plan that aligns with our investment beliefs and also takes into consideration any of our actuarial analysis that has been done. The prudent investment plan that I mentioned is in our most important policy document and can be found in the board's approved strategic asset allocation. So the board last went through this process in 2021 for both the pension plan as well as the OPEB trust. So going to slide 4. Thank you, Jim. Here we'll look at the investment beliefs. And I do want to mention that the board spent a lot of time on the investment beliefs last year. It was a topic at the offsite. It was a topic at subsequent meetings after the offsite. And then the investment beliefs were updated at the last December's board meeting. But the very first investment belief in the investment policy statement is on strategic asset allocation. And it is from that belief that we know that strategic asset allocation will be the primary determinant of risk and return outcomes. And therefore, LACERA attempts to set an allocation that will meet our mission as well as our investment objectives. So to do this, and this is coming from our investment beliefs, we understand, looking at this slide, that 1, LACERA is a long-term investor. 2, asset allocation has the greatest effect on returns relative to investment structure or manager selection. 3, asset allocation serves as a source of investment diversification to take advantage of growth opportunities while also mitigating downside risk across the portfolio. 4, asset allocation must always consider the plan's liabilities, actuarial assumptions, as well as capital market assumptions. And lastly, once we establish our plan, we must stick to it. So this is rebalancing. We got to stay within the board's approved policy ranges. So moving to slide 5.
So no animal spirit.
No, none. So here on slide 5, we'll look at the role of the strategic asset allocation. And I'll start at the bottom left. So this is kind of the whole life cycle of asset allocation. So on the bottom left, what we try to do is design an optimal mix of assets that balances the plan's long-term investment horizon. And then as we move clockwise to the top left, as we just discussed with our investment beliefs, we know that asset allocation is also the largest determinant of our expected risk and return outcomes. And continuing to the right, once the board establishes an asset allocation, we are given our investment plan. So that is our marching orders. And by implementing this plan and by sticking to it, us adhering to our strategic asset allocation and keeping the plan within the approved asset allocations, no animal spirit, we have our greatest chance of meeting our objectives and our overall mission that we discussed in the earlier slides. And then going to the next slide, this slide should look familiar for everybody. We also included in the trustee orientation. What this represents in this triangle, this is the drivers of a return for a portfolio. But what I do want to start with on this slide is by stating that this triangle is not proportional. I know Ms. Sanchez made a reference of our graphic skills. We're yet to design a triangle that actually has the proportions correct on this. So That is that the second slice, so in the most important thing here is the asset allocation. So that slice, the second slice from the top, is the primary driver of returns for a portfolio, and it alone can explain more than 75% of a portfolio's return variation. So I'll repeat that. Asset allocation alone can account for more than 75% of a portfolio's return variation, with some studies actually saying it accounts for as much as 92%. So while we spend time and work on every section in this triangle, it is important to understand that once our objective is defined, things such as manager selection and investment structure are smaller drivers of return when compared to overall asset allocation. And so moving to slide 7, as we go through this exercise, will be varying factors of considerations to deliberate. We'll have our normal core factors shown on the left, but we'll also have some other considerations that were not present the last time the board went through this exercise. So we'll concentrate on the first bullet point on the right side. So there are some blind spots when using the past to predict the future. So the strategic asset allocation process typically uses historical performance to inform future forecasting. So we must take into consideration the evolving environment we're in, inflation, interest rates, things of that nature. And we got to balance that to use the past to inform the future as we make our models. And along that same
Excuse me, real quick, in terms of the alternate sources that you might use to bring better visibility to blind spots, what are you anticipating that we'll have an opportunity to look at, or is there anything that we can look at in advance as we kind of progress towards that?
Yeah, so through Chair Sanchez, Mr. Jones, so we'll do different things such as scenario testing and stress testing. And as we run the models using different capital market assumptions, you might have an interest rate factor in there, for example, of like where we show lower interest rates, higher interest rates in the different modeling, and we'll show the board different outcomes of what our return expectations and risks are through the portfolio, through modeling. And as Makita will lead these exercises and we'll go through many different variations. And I think one of them is a big one at the offsite as well, talking about capital market expectations.
Yeah, if I could just weigh in there really quickly, the scenario analysis that we go in is going to be the most important and I think the most telling in the forward-looking context, because we look at it multiple different ways, and then you'll really see the sensitivities in the portfolio under different iterations of the construction on what might happen in future environments. Unfortunately, none of us have a perfect crystal ball, but we will spend a lot of time looking at different scenarios that may occur in the future.
Are we going out 2 standard deviations, 3 standard deviations from like the norm? Or are we trying to really take into account, just from an awareness standpoint, geopolitical event X, what does that do? Or do we try and stay? I'm just curious in terms of when we say blind spots, it's easy to think that we have one, but what typically defines a blind spot, and what do you do to bring a spotlight to it?
So we'll be looking at it in a couple of different angles. One, we'll be trying to capture the range of future outcomes. So addressing, 1 and 2 standard deviations, probably not spending an awful lot of time on the much smaller, but we do CVAR analysis, which gets into that final standard deviation tier. But the scenario analysis is really meant to predefine what a set of economic circumstances that could exist in the future. Let's say a rising interest rate environment that also is characterized by slowing GDP growth, and then look across every single asset category, how we would anticipate that response. So that's sort of a midpoint analysis, but we do it over multiple iterations. We can run it in Monte Carlo simulations and look at literally thousands of simulation patterns, all based on some of those variables.
Okay, yeah, I look forward to that.
May I define blind spot? A spot you cannot see.
Yeah.
May I ask that we look for an alternative?
That's right.
So
Continue.
yeah, so
Yeah.
So along that same topic that Trustee Jones brought up, so past performance will be based on over a decade of economic expansion, and more importantly, low interest rates. So the last time we went through this exercise and I sat up here with Makita, we talked about a low interest rate environment. interest rates were near zero last time we went through this. Today, I think the 10-year treasury, I looked it up before we came in here. My notes say 4%, but it was just below 4% as this morning. So this alone will have impact on our modeling that we didn't have last time. And lastly, we need to keep in mind other risks such as geopolitical risks, climate change, technological innovation, and demographic shifts that are happening across not only our country, but the globe.
Can I make a comment there, Mr. Pettis?
Yeah.
One thing I'd love to see, and I think it's important, and I'm sure you probably already have planned for it, but just in case, throwing it out there, let's make sure that we also give some good time to energy transition, which is a big highlight that was not present in 2016 when you began the process last. I mean, it was present, but we just simply were not talking about it as an industry as much. But energy transition and its impact. And I think with regard to the demographic shifts, let's make sure that we also think about how those shifts impact, labor, wages, but also resource demands. I'm sure that was already a part of your process, but in case it wasn't, I just want to make a note that I think those are important topics that need to be considered as well.
Noted, and we'll include that in the presentations
Great.
going forward.
Mr. Kelly, is yours new or old?
New.
Got it. And Ms. Jones, were you first? Yeah. Okay.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. On slide 5, one of the puzzle pieces is rebalancing, which I know is very important in maintaining the asset allocation in the manner we want to keep it. And I know you can't just push a button and voila, we're all back in balance. So could you share, just for my edification, some of the procedures or steps that you guys have to go through to make sure that we stay in balance? I know some investments are long-term investments, and it's not just always that simple to, rebalance. So could you share some of this procedures and steps you take in order to do that?
Definitely. So Chair Sanchez, Trustee Jones. So every month, and first I'll start off that as part of this exercise, when the board approves the strategic asset allocation, you'll also approve ranges that each asset category can be in. So Mr. Grable in the CIO report and Trustee Santos today talked about liquidity. So every month we look at the portfolio, we look at liquidity daily. And then when we do need to rebalance the portfolio, we have liquidity meetings on a monthly basis, and we discuss where can we rebalance the portfolio from. And so it's a meeting of all the PIOs, Mr. Grable himself, and we kind of discuss where should we take money from. Usually you take money from your assets that are overweight and then rebalance the portfolio to raise liquidity. So this is done daily through our overlay. We also have an overlay that helps us keep the portfolio rebalanced, and then physically we do it not every month, but close to as we raise liquidity. So that's how it's handled. We do understand that we have some of the liquid assets such as private equity or some of our real assets, real estate investments. So we do look at rebalancing more on a functional level. So we might look at growth, and if growth is overweight, that includes public equities, private equity, and then non-core real estate. So if we are rebalancing that portfolio, we're mostly looking at the physical equity, so like the ACWI account, for example, and that kind of trickles down through everything. I don't know if that answers your question directly.
Yes, and I assume we minimize any, in doing the rebalancing for the non-liquid assets, we minimize any like penalties or costs that come with that.
Yes. And then we have done some secondary sales in private equity, but it's rare that we would rebalance from any of the illiquid assets. So within each functional category, we try to keep enough what I'll call liquid assets so that we can rebalance from.
So another reason it's so important to balance that liquid portion of the assets, not only just for, obviously pay our bills, but for purposes of, keeping our asset allocation in balance in the ranges, within the ranges that we would like to have.
Exactly, to keep it within ranges. And then as Mr. Zons likes to talk about the 69 cents soon to be 70 that comes from investment returns.
Obvious. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So
we have one question from Mr. Kelly. I know you have one more slide, but.
Thank you. So my question is, we never talk about the federal debt in any of these slides, and I could go back for a whole year and do a word search in these presentations, and we just don't talk about the debt. And so my question is, should we or should we not? Because increasing, the last time we balanced the federal budget was under Bill Clinton, which is a while ago. And so particularly with the crisis, the market crisis we went through in recent months regarding the debt levels. So I would at least like to see an entry that says over the longer term, we're considering the federal debt limit. We're not considering federal debt. And why? I mean, I think we should document at least that we've talked about it, because at some point the bills have to be, the bill's going to come due. And what is the implications to the market over the longer term? Because nobody's talking about it at all. And it's not just you folks, but you know, when Ms. Sanchez is on TV, I don't see her talking about it either. Because
I talk about it, actually,
It's-
Mr. Kelly. Let me just say, it is a part of
Well,
what they do
kudos to Ms.
as an
Sanchez.
actual business. I take a lot of, yeah.
Kudos to
Look,
Ms.
I
Sanchez.
speak with
there.
umbrage here. And I
But-
will
but
make a
it's
comment
something,
too.
It's something we do need to at least document that we've considered and how we are dispositioning it in our analyses. I would appreciate that very much.
Yeah, and I will, I'm just going to take a moment here since you tried to single me out. I have been preaching for the last decade and a half, and 2 decades, that debt is future demand that we spend today, which means that it will impact growth in the future. I have said that for years and years and years, and that should be a part of our consideration. It is implicitly taken in because we are seeing expected growth to continue to slow as an economy, but that is a structural part of the reason for that.
So Chair Sanchez, Trustee Kelly, noted, we'll include, and it does play a large part. It's obviously the first building block of any return is interest rate. So I'll continue. So
Yes.
on that topic, in the coming months, Makita and the investment team will provide a series of educational topics on various elements in this essay study, as we mentioned, and this will include an overview of expectations and market dynamics, as we brought up, that we haven't seen since the last SAA exercise. So these educational sessions will inform recommendations and be presented to the board on a monthly basis, and that'll be a good transition to slide 8. So on slide 8, we show the proposed timeline, and understanding that all of this can be shifted around. We can add new requests, as we've already have today at the board, depending on how much time you want to spend on certain topics. So just keep in mind that while we do have a set plan, this is your study. This can all be moved around at your request. So, but you can see starting today that we will have a strategic asset allocation item on the BOI agenda all the way through the end of the fiscal year in 2024. So the goal is to make a recommendation to the BOI on the OPEB first, and then make any recommendations on the pension plan in early Q2 of next year. And if approved, it would be followed by an update to the IPS to reflect any asset allocation changes, benchmark changes. And then the hope is to have not hope, but the goal is to have a go live date of July 1, 2024. I do want to mention, as most of the trustees know, that Makita, the board consultant, plays a major role in leading the strategic asset allocation process. And with the approval of Chair Sanchez, I did want to see if Tim wanted to give any additional comments on this presentation.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Jude and Chair Sanchez. I think Jude did an excellent job articulating the importance of this particular asset allocation review that we're going to be focused on in the next couple of months. I just want to highlight really in our view, the 2 most important functions of this board is to set that strategic asset allocation direction, and then also to provide governance of the overall investment organization that is LACERA, both topics which we're going to be shining a light on quite brightly over the next several meetings. So we'll be doing a lot of work on strategic asset allocation and following a very thorough multi-step process, similar for those of you that have been around to what we've done in the past. But we certainly will add additional elements to it as advancements in data have come along and things that we can look at with more sophistication in climate. We'll certainly make note of even places such as the overall debt limit, where it's embedded in many of our economic assumptions. We'll certainly highlight where we can focus on that explicitly. And the process is meant to be responsive to you all. You are making this decision. We will be guiding you through this process, but it is one of the most critical decisions that this board will get to make. So with that, I'll turn it back over to anyone else for any other questions.
Okay, we have a question from Mr. Santos.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Perez, for your presentation. Just wanted to suggest for the team to think about we are going to have a new elected trustee and a new appointed trustee, somebody who's going to replace Ms. Sanchez. So at least with the elected trustees, we will. I think Mr. Lugo reported that the Board of Supervisors should be ratifying the results of the election sometime in October. So I would suggest to think about how we can begin the process of educating the new trustee in particular, because I'm sure the Board of Supervisors are not going to appoint Ms. Sanchez's replacement. Hopefully November or December, as soon as we know. Certainly we can talk to Supervisor Hahn, I believe, is the next appointed authority in hope that she can appoint somebody early on so they can begin, or that particular individual begin. Because this is, as you stated, this is very important process. And I hate to see Ms. Sanchez not being here, in particular for the 2024 portion of this task. So I just ask you to think about that carefully and perhaps work through the legal department and whoever to try to see if we can get that new trustee available to be able to start getting some training on that. The other point that I want to make, I want to thank you again for starting with the investment beliefs. I mean, they are so critical, you know, and it just, I hate to repeat this, but retweeting myself or rethread about the fact that this board, obviously none of us, I was the only one here when we raised the investment beliefs and the fact that it was the only one here. Come on, now, I was there. That's what I'm saying. Only was here, and they claimed that the investment beliefs was a boogeyman. Somehow or another, it was some union scheme to rip off the pension. And look how critical it is in terms of what we do here. So again, thank you for always, in almost every presentation, there's always a reference to the investment beliefs, which are really important.
Okay. Mr. Green, if your comment is short on the back of this.
It is, the chair is irreplaceable, but I was just going to offer my support. We really love and care about LACERA and the next steps. So I think that transition hasn't always been the smoothest, but I wanted to commit to it as well, whatever we can do to help make the transition smooth. So.
Okay, thank you. And on the back of that, I'll just say it is probably worth packaging all of the reporting, because we're going to go through a series of reports and making those available, curated for the new trustees as part of education, just to catch them up so that they can hit the ground running. Great, Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say something. Something similar as a part of the process, and maybe I'm the only one that didn't know you were going somewhere, so we got to catch up. Sounds like if you're leaving.
Oh, I'm at the end of my term, buddy boy.
Oh, is it just
Let me
end of
tell you,
term?
it's been like 100 years.
You're like my soul sister. So then, as a part of the curation, I'd love to know whether it's Tim or someone from the staff, just being the nerdy student, if there's like a common folder that you guys can, the articles you're reading or things that you're taking in, that we can get access to and just read while, out on the deck with a glass of wine, cigar.
A library.
Yeah. It'd be helpful. I would just, realizing this is one of the most important parts of the role, I really want to make sure that from a preparatory standpoint, we understand as much as contextually as you guys do at the point we finally get together to begin to talk about it. So if there's a common folder that you can create and curate for us, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So Trustee Sanchez, I can get that done.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe when we revert back to Board Vantage after the conversations we have on that, we can use the resource section in order to create a library. Okay. That would be awesome. Okay, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just some questions for clarification. In addition to looking at, both by staff and Makita, the federal debt, as Mr. Kelly brought up, I'm very curious about the geopolitical impacts and whatnot. Are you guys able to model, like, like if there was a famine migration or a, you know, like what happened in Syria, you know, a huge
Placement.
war displacement that can, you know, impact Europe as an example. Is there assumption, are you guys capable of modeling that as a what if? And that includes, you know, we've used past data. We just went through a pandemic. We also went through a major market crash. So we have that kind of data. I mean, you know, that's the joke. We had the space shuttle crash as kids, but our kids got a pandemic. I mean, so that's my question. In addition to modeling that stuff, nobody has a crystal ball, as Mr. Grable always says, which I love. But you know, modeling the what if, the potential.
So Chair Sanchez, Ms. Trustee Green, using the past. So as long as there's an event in the past that happened, you're able to take kind of what happened in those times. So you can see what type of impacts it had on different asset classes. And from that aspect, you can develop some type of models. I don't know if Tim wants to.
Yeah,
build on that.
we have a standard set of 20 historical scenarios that we look through. I mean, none that's as laser focused, let's say, as a you know, European crisis, but we can look back at the European debt crisis and explicitly model those years and see what's happened and test the, you know, future sensitivity of the portfolio to that type of event. We do model asset categories across a number of different levels. So we're able to do emerging market equity, let's say, but we're also able to model China by itself and then EM ex China, which I think would be one thing that would be very telling in analysis of future geopolitical risk. Because I think if we're talking about the sort of largest existential threat to global markets right now, it would be something where, you know, a Taiwan situation with China emerges similar to what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. And that's certainly going to be much more impactful in financial markets even than that event. So we'll definitely look at that particular level of analysis. And we're more than happy to pull any other historic scenarios that you might be interested in. But as you go further back in the time machine, less asset classes were available. The data is just much more limited. And so the analysis becomes much less useful, I would say, in a real world sort of modern sense.
Yeah. I would add to that too. There are certainly specialist consultants that only focus on that, like Kroll, Control Risks, GeoQuant, which is now owned by Fitch. And so there are also ways of at least getting some insights, even if we can't necessarily overlay them onto asset pricing per se. We can probably overlay them onto things like commodity pricing and other elements that have longer histories. So there are certainly ways to attack that. Okay, any other comments?
No.
Sorry, I keep putting on my consultant hat. I need to take that off. Okay, moving on. I think we're at the end of that presentation.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Pettis. That was excellent. We look forward to beginning that process. And I think the suggestions that were made about kind of ensuring that this becomes a nice on-ramp for the next folks who are coming onto the board, that will be, I think that will be a big step for us in terms of the library, the idea of a research library, the idea of curating these videos, which we are now in a position to be able to curate and put into a learning package or an onboarding package. These are great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next report. We have a governance, the BOI. At the BOI, we will be doing a governance review by Makita. So today we have an introduction to what that process will be, what it will look like, and how it will work. So I will hand it over to Mr. Fila and Ms. Eisen to walk us through the plan.
Good morning, dear trustees. Today, as Makita, we will be providing an introduction to governance overview. And if I can have the next page, please. So again, we will be providing an introduction to governance overview. And the focus of this session is basically on LACERA's governance structure on investments, as LACERA has been evolving with growth, as it has been growing with evolving and showing growth. And in terms of the layout for this presentation, we will be discussing an introduction and then some key tenets of governance, as well as key principles of governance. And then we will be providing an overview of some of the key recent developments with LACERA, and then ultimately provide a work plan along with a timeline for the plan for the sessions. And for the timeline specifically, and in terms of work plan, we have the 4 main components here, which we will review a little more in detail in the following pages. But at the end of today's presentation, the trustees will be provided an assessment survey, which will help us with also planning, especially for the offsite. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Tim Fila, for an introduction.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. If you could advance to the next slide. Great. So just to really highlight some of what Ison just built on, this is going to be a similar multi-step process to what we're going through with the strategic asset allocation review. It's also meant to be responsive to the board. So we're going to be conducting a survey, gathering information, but at each of these next several sessions, we're going to be looking for your feedback on potential recommendations. This is really your opportunity to let your voices be heard in setting the future direction. These are not decisions for us to make or us to tell you what to do. It's just to provide information so that you can make sure that LACERA is positioned, not just for how the portfolio and the investment organization functions now, but also in that scenario that we talk about, growth towards 100 billion, all of the different things that sort of capture the evolution of LACERA. So on that, the last time a thorough governance review was conducted was in 2016, 2017. That was led by Funston. They looked at multiple different things and ultimately came away with a couple of documents that were board powers reserved, board powers delegated. I think it's also really important to note that this board is constantly working on governance. You just refresh the investment beliefs. You've gone through multiple iterations of the corporate governance policies. You've gone through multiple different iterations of the investment policy statement. So all of that is governance work. This is just really meant to say, are we aligned with the current operating practices? Make sure that everything's cleaned up and that LACERA's position for the future. So with that, and I guess the other thing that we're going to try to highlight, we're going to show you different models. We're going to discuss what peer plans do. There's no one size fits all approach. The nature of every board is different. State regulatory environments are different. The strengths of available staffing in different places and the available talent that they have for their investment organization is different. So take all of this with a grain of salt, and we're really just trying to highlight some potential use cases for LACERA as we go forward.
Okay, Mr. Santos, is your question for now or after?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so are we also going to be looking at the role of the committees and how efficient those committees are? And I always been concerned that there are occasions that we have to move expeditiously, but yet we are delayed by all the red tape. The item has to go to the subcommittee, and the subcommittee recommends it to the board. We're talking about 2 or 3 months later that the board finally is going to be able to opine on that. So I think that will be really key. One, do we really need committees? And if the decision is yes, what will be the specific items that will go to those committees? Or what items will go directly to the board? And always looking for efficiency.
Yes, I mean, I think we're always trying to focus on the highest and best use of the time and resources that LACERA has. And certainly trustee time is one of those super valuable resources. We don't have anything explicitly focusing on any particular area. And the reason why we're going to do the survey first is to try to identify some points of interest. So there is a question in there where you're doing a self-assessment across multiple different dimensions, and the functioning of the committees is one of those. So if that gets flagged as an area for further attention, then that's where we're going to shift our sort of activities to try and, see what might be a better fit than the current structure, do a deeper dive into maybe some other peer organizations and what they would do in a committee structure. But ideally, we'll be using the survey as that first step to identify any of these critical areas for improvement. And I know the last time around, I believe the committees was also a big focus of it. So I think there was some evolution that took place in 2016 and 2017, but would certainly look to build on any progress that's been made. And I know, we're going to get into some of the other key changes to LACERA, but we want to make sure, across the whole governance structure that really reflects the way in which LACERA is operating currently.
Right, and we should also discuss the process by which the chair assign people to those, if we do decide to retain the committees, how the chair will go about appointing chairs of these committees. And in my view, we should be selective in terms of the skill set of different board members that we can take advantage of that. And then, of course, the new trustees and how can they be plugged into certain committees so they can expedite the learning process. So we might be able to use that if we think it through. We might be able to utilize those committees again if we think that we're going to keep them to also advance the skills around the horseshoe.
You didn't like my magic 8-ball approach? Just kidding. I put more thought into it than that.
But it should be some guidance for
Absolutely.
for the chair.
Excellent. Maybe I'll pass it back to Eisen for
Sure.
the next slide.
Next page, please. And this page serves as a refresher on the importance of governance along with key principles. Governance is the backbone for any organization in fulfilling its mission. And it is basically a system of policies and processes in making decisions, in setting direction and providing oversight, and then ultimately providing accountability for an organization. And some key tenets and key principles for governance includes a clear framework for making consistent, effective, and efficient decisions. And then very clear roles and responsibilities defined throughout the organization. And on those, some guardrails and internal controls to align with the roles, and responsibilities, ultimately and very importantly, ensuring accountability and transparency. And at this point, I think it's also important to remind everyone that governance is not static. It evolves with an organization. So it's good to help for it to be responsive to future evolution in terms of an organization. Ultimately, a comprehensive governance reduces risks in a lot of dimensions. And in the context of a pension plan, it helps, and effective governance helps fulfilling the fiduciary duty. And with that, I will pass it back to Tim for an overview of work plan along with key recent developments.
Okay, we do have a question from Mr. Knox.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and the last piece was interesting to me, the reputational risk and kind of how governance folds in with that. I think that would be an important area to focus in on. I know during my tenure as chair of the BOI, we had a lot of conversations about that. And I think that's just becoming a larger area of focus. And maybe the folks that have a longer tenure than I do, can say if that's evolved over time. But at least in my short tenure, it seems like that's more of an area of focus than there used to be. But
I would agree with that 100%. I mean, there's certainly much more scrutiny on public organizations, information that's readily available. A lot of reporters that are hyper focused on getting gotcha aha moments, and the news cycle is just much faster and more dynamic. So I think you're 100% right. And the reputational side of it is something that is directly controllable. I mean, it's still going to be an organization managed by human beings that are essentially flawed to some degree or other, although some of us may not want to admit that fully. So it's having the right policies and controls in place to make sure that you're limiting conflicts of interest, and that where undue influence can come into the portfolio, that's being regulated, monitored, and mitigated as best as possible. So that is exactly the whole purpose for going through this type of a process.
Thank you.
Great. Okay.
And just before we go to the next slide, I did want to highlight for Mr. Santos that we did identify an investment belief that we think this aligns with, which is the people sources matter. So we're really talking about efficient operations and procedures and utilizing the best resources available to LACERA, also making sure that education component is being met. I think that's a really important element of the overall governance structure. So we want to make sure that everything there aligns with that investment belief as well. Next slide. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the things, and many of you have been with LACERA for a long time, but we're just going to focus on what's gone on since 2016. The assets of the organization have grown from 47 billion to 72 billion. That's quite tremendous growth over that period of time, and well on the pathway to the case for 100 billion. I know we've looked at the investment model in that scenario of $100 billion plus. So LACERA is certainly moving along that pathway. The portfolio has also gotten a lot more complicated. We've added a lot of additional asset categories. You do have a lot more illiquid strategies in the portfolio, so that speaks to additional complexity with doing rebalancings. Certainly the underlying operations are more complicated once you have private market strategies at this level. And then I think the other thing that's really important is the board approved the Towards Best in Class Investor Strategic Plan, which is a long-run strategic plan that's really meant to set LACERA up for future growth, but also reflect that LACERA at your asset size should be a leading global best-in-class investor, and not simply an asset allocation only model. It has 5 strategic initiatives underneath it, and I think all of those tie in pretty well with an overall governance review. A few other things operationally that have changed a little bit recently. We've seen delegated authority used for private equity re-ups and co-investments, allowing sort of more timely responses to market conditions, particularly in private markets. There's a constant fundraising cycle, and you have to be responsive to who's in markets with which products, and making sure that those align with what the investment goals of LACERA are. Kind of makes long, bulky search processes difficult, and so having that delegated authority provides additional capabilities for LACERA. Also used in the passive manager search, where it's sort of more of a commoditized overall landscape. One other thing that having a delegated process there does is it sort of eliminates some of the endpoint bias that you're always going to get when you're in we're doing a search as of a particular date. There's definitely endpoint bias that can influence how those go. So having sort of more open processes might be something that we look at going forward. And then I think the other key element of LACERA's growth has really been in the staff and the resources available to staff as well. The investment division has nearly doubled. That's been a result of relatively low turnover, leading to a much deeper and experienced overall team than what we experienced when we first signed on as consultants in 2016. And so that, I think, is an interesting area of this as well, when we're talking about this concept of accountability. When you have a large and consistent staff, where you also have a relatively deep bench, that should really be the area where you're focusing on as the entity to be accountable, because the board, as we all discussed this morning, is going to have certain elements of turnover. You're going to have differing levels of experience coming and going. But when you do have a really strong investment division, you want them to be as accountable as possible for the underlying decision-making and implementation. Also, just the increased use of technology across the organization. When we first signed on, and this was pre-pandemic, staff didn't have issued laptops and various different things. I mean, we've come a long way. And now we're talking about using very sophisticated, very sophisticated risk systems, and all sorts of additional tools that team is utilizing. And then also having dedicated resources to corporate governance and stewardship. I think we've seen a lot of advancements there as far as how that influences the investments, but also the sort of outward facing activities and reputation of LACERA and the global pension landscape. A lot has changed there. And I think I already hit on it, but we do have some future changes coming on the board as well. So as we're going through this type of process, and also the strategic asset allocation, we want to be mindful of trying to get to a point where we do have relatively good board continuity now, making some series of determinations before we get into a period where we're going to have to focus on re-educating and reintegrating. I think this group has a lot of continuity, and I think is well positioned to make a bunch of these important decisions, whether it's forward-looking governance or the strategic asset allocation. So I would just urge you all to really put the time and effort in now and utilize this opportunity well.
Okay, great. We have a couple of comments on this slide. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. I would add what I didn't see on this slide is an activist stakeholder group. We had in these past several years regarding some of our investments, some strong opinions about those investments and a somewhat misunderstanding about our role was related to some of those investments. And what we were told was that this was going to be addressed in our communication strategic plan, which was then incorporated into the overall strategic plan. I've not yet read that component of the strategic plan, so I don't know what is the expectation now as to how we're to play ball in this area. But we do face, I think, increasing potential for very engaged stakeholder groups regarding our investment. And as Mr. Knox just pointed out, that has implications to our reputation. So I didn't see it mentioned here. I'll include it on my survey response if there's other section, but I did want to note that. Thank you. Thank you for your presentations. Very informative.
Great.
There is another section on there. We'll certainly make note of that as well, because you're absolutely right. There's, as the news cycles changed, it just also allows for any organization that's public facing and has public comment and various different things to have that engaged stakeholder activity increased over time.
Okay.
Maybe next slide.
Oh, wait, we have one more comment, Mr. Santos.
Yeah, talking about governance and staff not getting computers when they were in an 18-hour flight. I think, and I have said this before, Mr. Lugo, I think it's important that at some point we initiate a salary study for the staff. I want to make sure that we don't be faced when I'm gone with an issue that, we're not being competitive. And I think that's part of the governance. We need to make sure that the team remains in place. We are in a position to attract new people and certainly maintain the staff level. So I've been saying this for the past couple of years. I have not seen anything. I think before I leave this board, I'm going to make sure that somehow, some way, even through emotion, that we get that study so we can take a look at it, and especially for Mr. Grable, to figure out how to proceed from that study. So that's something that, please tell Mr. Kryman that I'm on it.
Okay. You had no idea that this was the beginning of the survey starting today.
I think that's fantastic. We always like back in the earlier, the better.
Okay, great. Mr. Knox. Oh,
Yeah.
Mr. Lugo, you want to make a comment?
If I may, Chair, Madam Chair.
Yep.
We do have a current classification compensation study for the investments division that's currently being reviewed in terms of our RFP, RFI. So
You guys been listening?
Yes, we
That's
have.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Okay,
All
awesome.
right, staff.
Yeah. Mr. Knox.
Just to follow up on the same point of compensation, not just dollars, but different types of structures would be helpful too. I've mentioned the potential for incentive pay. I'm not lobbying for that one way or the other. I just know that other systems do that. And I think that'd be a useful exercise for us to look at. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe I'll take that as a cue to advance the slide to the next one. And I'll have Ison go over this, but I think you'll see where it ties back into your comment, Mr. Knox.
Sure. And as I mentioned in my opening remark, at the end of today, trustees will be provided an assessment survey, which, we will be, so this is for today, for the July. Today is the introduction, and then the survey will be provided. And then the next four components that I briefly mentioned in my opening remarks, in August, we'll be focusing on the overview of pension governance models. So we'll be able to look at some of the various governance models and how they work, how they interact, and how it may fit different levels of accountability and transparency and work between the board and the staff. And then in September, we'll be focusing on the survey results during the offsite, which will help us also together look at the board and committee evaluation. I think that's maybe some of the especially comments that were made today will be very helpful in preparing for that session in particular. And then followed in October with a peer plan review, which will be helpful to see for plans similar, maybe slightly larger, smaller, but overall what kind of plans are out there with what kind of structures in terms of governance, accountability, and governance. And then ultimately in November, we'll be looking at the overall sessions and what we learned, and in terms of discussion of findings, along with potential enhancements for governance, and concluding that with the November session. But that's basically the timeline along with the work plan that we have in mind for these sessions.
Yeah, so certainly we'll have bites at the sort of compensation model as part of the overall pension governance models. The Canadian model stands out as a particular example where it's, very much Wall Street competitive pay, incentive performance mechanisms making up, the majority of the pay structures there. We'll also take a look at that in October when we look at the peer plan review as well. None of it's meant to be one size fits all, but we'll certainly give you a sense of what the landscape looks like there. And then also in that survey, in the other category, there will be an opportunity to further highlight that if that's an area that folks want to do a deeper dive into. Some of that we may struggle a little bit with transparency. There's a lot of information that you can extract publicly from other organizations, from their annual financial reports, et cetera. Compensation may or may not be one place that we will be able to comprehensively capture, but we're certainly going to look at it when we review the other models.
Super.
Maybe next slide.
That's the summary.
And then I think we don't even need to summarize because we've hit on all this, but the one thing I would say is, we're going to go through a thorough multi-step process, but this is really meant to be your process. So we're working for you on this project, and where you want to shine the light, we're going to try to develop the resources and make sure you have the information that you can set the forward-looking policy based on. Take the survey seriously. Please provide any feedback, and we look forward to working on this project with you all.
Thank you. And we look forward to having it. So we have a couple more comments here. Ms. Jones.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. I especially appreciate the slide regarding the recent changes at LACERA. Being a fairly new board member, it's nice to see the progression of LACERA over time. The other question, though, that I had was in regard to kind of what's going on also out in the world and how that may play a role in governance. I don't know, for example, like ESG is a big thing and it's being discussed and it's quite a controversial topic, but do we ever spend time or are we going to spend time looking at factors that may be outside of LACERA but could play a role in the governance of LACERA?
We certainly can highlight that going through here, but I would say there's already been tremendous work. And I don't know if John or Scott want to talk about some of the advancements that have been made, but I think that's one of the areas where LACERA has probably progressed the most, from initiatives like LACERA Tide to all of the different work that's been done on corporate governance. The amount of boards and organizations that LACERA participates in is absolutely tremendous. So I think that light's already being shown pretty brightly, but maybe John, you want to weigh in?
Through the chair, if it's okay, I think that I will brag for Scott in the sense that I think Scott has really helped elevate. You know, we talk about potential reputational risk. I think that there's kind of reputational, you know, an asset, the flip side of that. And I think that LACERA has tremendous brand creation over the last half dozen years or so, because of the elevation of the program at the, you know, request of the board to really create, you know, to bolster the performance of our investment assets through multiple windows. So I would say that on that slide that was referenced about the changes to the plan, and that kind of dovetails to another presentation at the offsite about the evolution of the portfolio. We have a dedicated stewardship team, which we didn't have, you know, 6-7 years ago.
Awesome, thank you.
Great. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, and kind of along those lines of kind of best in class investor, probably needs a best in class trustee board. It'd be nice to know just from some general measures, and it can be both public peer level as well as private levels. So we can just get some gap analysis in terms of where we are, and that as we think about the next 3 to 5 years, what are some things that we can be inching towards both as a board and maybe also inform the process of what future trustees could bring, you know, as a part of that process as well. I think would be helpful.
Yeah, that is a great point. And we do also have materials here at LACERA that we provide now guidance to the supervisors with regard to the legal kind of stipulations that are made in, I believe it's Searle. Is that correct, Mr. S? So yeah, but that's a great point, that it would be great to do a skills assessment and analysis. Okay. Any last comments or questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Fellow and Ms. Eisen. That was fantastic. And I think we're all really clearly engaged in this topic. So I look forward to the survey. So when will we be receiving this survey, and when will we need to have it done by?
I think the survey will be out early next week, and probably give it a week to 10 days to turn around. And then that gives us sufficient time, I think, to analyze the results and work on the presentation materials for September. But we'll work with staff on ironing out the exact timing on that.
Okay. Great. And everybody, please find time to get that survey back. Okay. Moving on, the next items that we have on the agenda, C through G, are for information only. Do we have any comments, questions on those? All right, moving on, items for staff review.
Okay. So the first item is Trustee Kelly requested that information on the polling samples on the audit of retirement elections, payment contracts, and data entry be explained on the next CO report. Trustee Kelly also requested that the status of the acting and interim positions at LACERA, he just wants a broad overview and the priority be provided on the next CO report. Trustee Jones requested for staff to provide trustees with reports and articles that in the library. Trustee Sanchez requested staff to consider energy transition and its impact. Trustee Kelly requested that we include the federal debt as a topic of discussion. Trustee Jones requested that investment knowledge related to information be placed on the one meeting or the board vantage, whatever you use. And Trustee Santos requested that we come up with a plan on educating the new Board of Investment Trustees. And the last item was Mr. Kelly asked the Makita team to include the stakeholder group.
Okay, a lot of items for follow-up. Thank you. Any items for future agendas?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, good of the order.
Okay, let's start with Mr. Knox.
Thank you. Great discussion. Looking forward to the offsite and appreciate everything the staff did leading up to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Oh, just real briefly, just a huge shout out to Scott Drazel and all the great work he's doing on ESG and for answering all my stupid questions, picking up the phone and getting back to me and being so responsive. So thank you to John and Scott and the team. Just really today, the 50,000 foot view shows us how far we've come as a pension fund, and just really proud of the great work we've done, especially in the ESG space. So just want to say thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Santos.
Yes, thank you. I want to again thank the staff. I really appreciate all the work you do, that you've been doing and will continue to do. Without you, we won't be able to function as well as we function, and it certainly makes Mr. Grable's job a lot easier when the staff does what you always do. That's why I'm keenly focused on making sure that you will be compensated appropriately. It's all for self-interest as a beneficiary, because I want to make sure that we have the best, and that's what we have here. And I want to make sure that we keep that, we keep you. The only thing I can do when I tell my family, when they come to me with a problem, the only thing I can do is throw money at the problem. But certainly is my way of appreciating the work you do. So as long as I'm on this board, I'll have your back because you deserve it. I appreciate it. And talking about the delegated authority that the chair and I usually discuss, I have said it before. I was totally against delegated authority because I did not trust the previous CIOs that were here. And when I did trust some of the staff that's still here, I wasn't comfortable on delegation of authority. Now I am. Why? Because you proved to me that you deserve that. You're always very reliable and transparent when you are tasked with doing something, or when we delegate the authority to you on the CIO. And of course, that comes with the CIO. It took years for me to develop that level of respect, but you have earned it, and I'm in full support and look forward to the discussion about delegation of authority at the offsite, because I think it's important and it's also could be very efficient. But I tell my colleagues around the horseshoe, trust, but verify. Okay, so I trust you, but I'm always reading those reports, and you know that. Those of you who've been here as long as I have, I'm always looking at that. And that's how I was able to learn the level of respect that I have for you. And again, thank you, and keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Santos. Mr. Green?
Not much, just, the volume of information you guys put together as staff it's impressive, and it's thorough, and appreciate all the help, Mr. Grable, and with all this stuff, and pretty much it. Thank you very much. Thanks
Thank
for the
you.
work.
Mr. Rue?
Hi, thank you. I just want to echo what a lot of the other board members said. I really want to appreciate the staff and all the work that you're putting and all the extra trainings that they've been providing for me. Really looking forward to the offsite. And I really enjoy the conversation, hearing the conversation today, especially about additional training for the new incoming board members, which I like to include myself in that group, because I am very concerned with our chair leaving, a lot of our veterans leaving. Santos, David Green, Joe Kelly. We're losing a lot of institutional knowledge. So the focus on training, the focus on historical education and all that is very much appreciated, at least very much appreciated on my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, another retweet out there to what everyone else has said. Just a thankfulness to the staff. Again, as nerds who take our public civic role seriously and the level of preparation. Although it took me a while to get away from the stacks of mail or the packets that would arrive, and I'm completely electronic now.
Yeah.
But appreciate the level of detail and being able to go through it. And the transparency. Shout out to the new CIO report and some of the adjusted graphics in there, particularly around risk. Likewise, can't have great staff without great management. So again, just pat on the backs for that. And then lastly, not necessarily a sentimental one, but having been one that got here for a few years and just, already these faces, and you travel with some are familiar. I can't imagine anyone rolling off of this board at this stage, but I get it because there's other lives and things through there too on that piece. But I just enjoy the collegiality. I know the Brown Act limits us from interacting as much as we'd like to, probably even away from it, but just in the moments that we have while we're out traveling and doing things too, I just appreciate the collegiality and the seriousness with which we take our role here as public fiduciaries. So just wanted to compliment the staff of the organization for that. Yep.
Thank you, Mrs. Jones.
Thank you. I just wanted to retweet all of the congratulations for the staff that were recently promoted. And so I know it was well deserving, as well as I really do appreciate the changes that were made in the investment report. It does, number one, I like change. After you look at the same report, you start to glaze over
I
it.
mean, you're going digital too? Or
No.
you were able to say me?
I'm not there yet.
I'm there for you. I'm there for you.
I
have a
know,
support
I'm
group.
not there yet. I'm working on it. I do want to save the trees, but I'm not there yet. Because I like to just hold the paper. And so as I hold it up, thank you, because this information, it does allow me to be able to digest it more. And of course, I have to say thanks and shout out to whoever, does those staff charts of the month. Those are my favorite, which I found very informative this month about our banking deposits and how that shift has changed over the years. So all this information really helps us to internalize this data so that we can make, good decisions from here. And so I appreciate just the education and the information. And we, if we can't fault staff for it's there, they gave it to us, it's there. It's for us to digest it, understand it, ask questions, and really, grow with that. And then also, of course, Mr. Grable, your appointment, we kind of glossed over that really quickly, but, congratulations on that appointment as well. And I look forward to the offsite because that's always a nice different environment, and we get to hear some guests that come out. So I'm excited. So thank you, because I know staff's putting a lot of time and effort into that. So I look forward to that occasion. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. So I know some of you may think I'm trying out an early Halloween costume, but I'm not. I hurt my eye in a freak accident in my yard about 3 weeks ago. And since then, after being in the ER for a number of hours and seeing multiple doctors, and now I'm officially in wound care. When I went to check out the ER after all those hours in it, after seeing 4 specialists, the cashier said, "Mr. Kelly, $5. And I'm the only retiree on this board, and $5, I can afford it, obviously, but it reminded me of one of the significant aspects of being a retiree is retiree healthcare. And when I saw today's report that we have nearly $3 billion reserved to pay the unfunded liability in retiree healthcare over future years, I was so proud of that. Now that decision comes from a source from the county board because they allocate that money each year in the budget process. But this board's been very smart in managing that pool of money. And I was really impressed with that. Retiree healthcare is a big issue in addition to the retiree dollars that we get every month. It's the fact that we can suffer a freak accident and go into the ER for a lot of hours and see multiple doctors, and still I have a $5 bill. So I want to continue to thank the stakeholders in that process, because it's been really a significant one. And I want to thank Alex here for showing me how I could zoom out or zoom in on my slides so I could see today, because it's still a significant challenge for me to see. I have significant vision damage in my right eye that I'm hoping we can address after August 1st when the trauma subsides, either by a number of options, including surgery. So I'm hoping that I can remove my eye patch at some point in the future. But thank you again for a great meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Gable.
Thank you, Linda. Mr. Kelly, best wishes for a speedy and full recovery. And I think at the point about OPEB isn't lost on staff. You know, we don't have dedicated resources focused fully on OPEB. Maybe that's an issue for a later point in time, but it's not a secondary priority for staff. And $3 billion, there are probably there are SERL systems with, less than that in their pension fund. $3 billion is a significant pool of capital. It's a major pool of capital, and we treat it as such. So thank you for mentioning that. Also want to thank the full board for constantly challenging us to improve. The feedback's helpful, not because we want a pat on the back, because rather we want, to be pushed in the direction that is that better informs the board and better positions the fund and OPEB for the benefit of all our members. Towards that, one of the things that, to retweet myself again, is that the outcome for financial capital is dependent upon human capital, and that is the team. There are a couple of announcements that I'd like to make regarding the investment team. In addition to Jude's promotion to deputy CIO, there's another change in that Tara Elijah, who is a FA2 in portfolio analytics, has decided to move over to a real assets team, which I see that the chair of the real assets committee is very excited about that. Tara, one of the things that the board may or may not remember is that Tara, prior to joining LACERA, was at CalPERS and spent her time there in their real assets team. So she brings tremendous experience, and much like the terrific job that she's done for our portfolio analytics in the fund as a whole, it will now be slightly more concentrated in our real assets group, yet the fund as a whole will continue to benefit. So congratulations, Tara, on moving over to real assets. I would like to introduce a new member of the team, Sanaya Ginayan. It joined us a week or so ago. So this is the second week. Sanaya is an FA2 in our portfolio analytics team, which is a great place for anyone listening, for the interns that are sitting behind me, two of whom I'll introduce after this. Portfolio analytics is a great place to really develop an investment career. This is my public service announcement, because you're exposed to everything. You're exposed to risk management. You're exposed to every single asset category. You're exposed to performance reporting. You're exposed to strategic asset allocation. And that is really a foundational aspect of being a good investor, is being exposed to as much as possible. Sanaya joins us from Wells Fargo. Once again, as it relates to, we're better as a whole because of the inputs and the variety of backgrounds from the team. Sanaya's background is different in that at Wells Fargo. She was in their high net worth and ultra high net worth practice, which is, a different set of skills. And I think that will, once again, make us better as a team in our discussions. And a tangent to that, for next month's agenda, we have a discussion about the evolution, the development of our internal investment committees, and the variety of voices we have around the table really, add to the fulsome nature of our internal debate. So welcome to Team Sanaya. We're really excited to have you with us and for a long time, hopefully. So last month, I introduced two interns that were focused in real estate. This month, I'll introduce, we have two other interns. So this is our high watermark as it relates to number of simultaneous interns at LACERA at 4. Hopefully it continues to grow from there. Both the women that I'm going to introduce were sourced through Girls Who Invest, which is a great organization that we've done some work with, and hopefully we'll continue to do more work with going forward. So the first intern I'll introduce is Ana Morales. And Anna's standing in the back. Ana is a rising junior at Pomona College, USC. Okay. Ana is at Pomona College, where her major is public policy analysis, combined with a concentration in sociology, which I think is great experience. She's from the Chicago area. And, just looking at her CV, I think one of the things that's great to see is that, she's paying it forward already in that she continues to work with a group called Uncommon Good and works with 6th through 8th graders on a weekly writing workshop. And, writing is fundamental. It's in many cases, especially with, AI, it's a lost skill. And I think if there's any one thing I know that all of us can do better, it's to communicate, and one form of communication is writing. So I think it's terrific what Ana is doing. So welcome for the summer. And then our second intern that I'll introduce today is Sophia Haddon. Sophia is also a rising junior at Harvard University in Cambridge.
Hey, haters. That's right.
Her major is economics with a minor in psychology. And I think, once again, that's a really interesting combination of educational experience. Sophia is from Lake Charles, Louisiana. So, so additional representation as it relates to different geographic areas. And Sophia can give us pointers as she is a member of the Harvard Venture Capital Club. And I think it's really interesting just in terms of how discussions on campus has, how they really have changed in that, 10, 20 years ago, there probably weren't venture capital clubs on campus. Maybe a couple schools in the Bay Area had venture capital clubs, but not across the country. And, I think that, Ana and Sophia, have really added to the discussion, participated in lots of meetings, and, we're really excited to have them as part of the team for the summer. So welcome.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Mr. Kelly, did you want to say something after? Or are you good? Okay. Steve?
It's executive session. The Brown Act requires that I publicly state that agenda item 3B1 relates to the FDIC receivership of Silicon Valley Bank. And that will be noted in the minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Sanchez?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, big congratulations to Mr. Pettis, echoing Ms. Jones's comment. Congratulations to your new appointment. We are very thrilled. You have been effectively doing this job now for a while, so it is wonderful to see the continuity and the evolution. And, you know, I think it continues to be an inspiration to everyone on staff to know that there are paths forward within LACERA as well as outside of LACERA. So fantastic. And congratulations to all of the other appointments, Tara. Looking forward to seeing your work. Love our internship program, and thank you for the introduction of our new people. I'm not going to play favorites, but I'm very, very thrilled to have everyone be a part of what we do to get exposure, to ensure that we start to create, start to do our recruiting process early and ensure that we have the best and the brightest, knowing that this is a fantastic career path. So thank you for bringing us some wonderful human capital. And yeah, I think with that, I will go ahead and take a motion for adjournment of the meeting, and we will move into executive session. Given that we have not had a break, let's go ahead and take a 20-minute break. So we'll start at 10 after in order to clear the room and do all of that. But thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in executive session.
Thank you. Thank you.